Hi, I'm Sharon Sutherland, and I am joining you today as part of Mediate BC's virtual expo. Thank you. Where I'm going to talk about, can fiction make you a better conflict resolver? That is the plan. And I'm going to talk through a bunch of different things, but I'm going to just quickly start with a few things. So, as I said, this is part of Mediate BC's virtual expo, a chance to hear from a lot of different conflict resolution providers about topics that they're interested in conflict resolution. I happen to be here on the very last day of Conflict Resolution Week, so I believe that I am the last presenter. But that said, if you go to the Mediate BC website, you'll see links to the presentations that others have done this week, and there's a lot of really interesting topics that are worth checking out. Mediate BC itself is a not-for-profit organization that focuses on leading, promoting, and facilitating mediation throughout the province of British Columbia. It looks at all kinds of other collaborative processes as well, and that's something that's relevant for the conversation I'm having, since I'm planning to talk a little bit more broadly about conflict resolution as a topic. In any event, check out Mediate BC's page, and I'll remind you to do that again at the end because there's definitely things you might want to check out. I do want to say that while I am promoting Mediate BC, clearly, this is Mediate BC is not necessarily condoning or agreeing with any of the comments that I make in this particular presentation. So these are just my own opinions and thoughts about conflict resolution. So the reason I'm talking about this particular topic is primarily because when I realized that Mediate BC was doing this virtual expo and was inviting their mediators, their roster mediators, to participate in talking about things that interested them, I was also simultaneously looking at a page that said that the theme for this conflict resolution week was "There's another story." And it was really difficult for me to look at that without thinking that there are just so many ways in which story is really an important part of what we do in our conflict resolution um, work and in the way we learn about conflict resolution. So I thought I would just go really literal and start looking at how fiction itself, as opposed to the kinds of thoughts that another story might necessarily raise in the conflict resolution area, normally take you to the idea of victim, thinking yourself as a victim, thinking of yourself as a villain, thinking of yourself as a hero in your own story, and that somehow blocking or creating challenges in terms of how we actually come together in conflict. The other way of thinking about it is, well, if you're actually just looking at fictional stories completely separate from yourself, not trying to analyze your own story through fiction, but instead thinking about, well, what is there in fiction that if we break it down and analyze it, we might actually be able to learn from and improve the way that we engage with conflict ourselves. So there's a few different things that I wanted to talk about. And I just want to be clear that when I'm talking about fiction, in my mind, I'm thinking really, really broadly. I'm thinking about fiction as something that could be a novel, definitely. Certainly, the kinds of things we often think of could be a children's book, could be a young adult book. But beyond the written word, it could also be television, it could be film, any kind of media that provides a fictional story. There's different reasons why some of the visual media, for instance, might actually capture even more because it can be even more immediate. But there are all kinds of different things. And more broadly, when we talk about the way that we engage with different types of media, I think we forget things like video games, which are so tied into story and narrative. And it's all about world building and creating a space in which stories occur between and amongst characters. Role playing games that we participate in and engage with that might actually be really, really great ways to immerse ourselves in stories and learn more that way. Um, all of those sorts of things. So I mean, we should be thinking about things like D&D campaigns and not putting them aside and saying that's not something we're interested in. And I apologize, I have no way to tune out that phone, which is going to ring. But in any event, those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. The thing that is common in them is that they are going to all be things that are fictional. They're going to be story. and they're going to be they're going to be discrete texts. And I use that term knowing that anybody who has taken any kind of literature degree, media studies degree, communication studies degree, they will have a really specific understanding of what text is. So that what we can break apart to analyze. And I think that any of these fictional things provide us, whether they are something that we have seen on stage, whether they are something that we can look at in the book, they provide us with a text, something that we can actually um, always look back to and break down. And there's real value to that in the way that we tackle our learning, because we are able to look at something, to repeat it, to go back to it, and to think about different ways of doing it. And I thought I'd share a story myself just about something that happened to me this week that was actually really on point. I am teaching a course at the University of Victoria in dispute resolution at the law school. And one of the assignments that I had given the students at the beginning of the term, really because I was simply trying to engage them in thinking about how to apply a conflict resolution lens to other things that they were doing, I'd ask them to identify some text. TV, whether it was part of an original one, but they could go beyond that. They could look at other kinds of texts that they could engage with. Generally, though, fictional texts, and to apply the lens that we were learning as we were talking about conflict resolution to that text and to analyze it. Um, that seems like a fairly straightforward thing to do as let's just make sure we're actually grappling with things. Let's see that we're understanding how conflict resolution might play out in ways beyond what we're talking about in the legal context. It's not just about lawyers talking. So I gave that assignment. I'm most of the way through marking it. I'm getting some amazing things back from it, and that's great. But in addition to that, what I thought was really interesting was our last week of classes is next week. And I turned over to the students at the end of our last class saying, you know what, we can do whatever you want to next week. Parameters are really limited. We've got 3 hours, that's the max. This is our classroom, and it needs to be on a dispute resolution topic that I can buy into and know that we're actually engaged in effective learning and we're continuing to progress. And what was interesting to me was the students spent some time by themselves. I left the classroom. And when I came back, what they proposed was something that I thought was a fascinating way of using texts to learn more about conflict resolution. They are going to, over the weekend, complete a poll on the different things that they had identified for that first assignment. So some of them came up with episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or a scene from the movie Intolerable Cruelty, or somebody wrote about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So they're going to put all of those things up and identify which scenes they want to take and study in that class. And by study, I mean play the text, play whatever that piece of media is, and then work in groups to try to improve the outcome by applying the conflict resolution skills they've been learning. I just thought that it's such an interesting approach, and so such an awareness that you can actually take that particular text and break it down and try it again, replay it, see if you can do something with it to change the story by changing the skills that are in use. So that was one thought that I just really came to me this week. As well, I was kind of interested by just wanting to talk a little bit about when we think about conflict resolvers and becoming a mediator and learning those skills. We often talk about one of the things that you really need to be able to bring to bear is empathy. You need to actually be able to listen to somebody talk about what brings them into a conflict and have some ability to understand, to tap into, and to get a sense of their viewpoint. It's absolutely critical to be good in any kind of collaborative process, to be able to have empathy, to understand others' perspectives. Well, one of the ways we learn the most about others' perspectives is actually engaging with fiction. It's our best chance to learn about people who grow up in different circumstances than we do, who live in countries other than ours. And in many ways, an imagined country actually brings us more information about how we engage than a real country. We're seeing opportunities and thoughts that authors are bringing to bear around how the world could be, and we're able to ask questions about why it isn't. One of an author that I really like who recently was writing on this topic was Shannon Hale. And for any of you who engage with young adult fiction, I'm sure you know Shannon Hale. She wrote most famously Princess Academy books. And when she travels on those books, she's written quite a number of times, and she tweets quite a lot about the fact that she'll go to different book readings, or she'll go to libraries and schools with her book. And one of the questions she often gets, frighteningly, sometimes from librarians, but also from parents, is, when she's going to write something that the boys can read. Or, it's too bad that my son can't read Princess Academy because it's a book that nobody but girls can possibly appreciate. And she wrote a really good post recently about just how sad it is that there's this assumption that if you're reading about somebody different from you, you can't understand their story, you can't engage with it, that there's no particular reason to engage. And of course, the entire point of reading is very often to be able to develop empathy for that character who's different than you. So, I mean, her advice is clearly to send the message that boys can definitely read about girls. But I think there's a broader message there that any kind of fiction actually helps us engage with and think about others' perspectives far beyond just, did I read about all boys when I was growing up? Well, mostly, yeah, it's true, simply because of the age I am. But could I also read about others? And I thought, for instance, I'm going to a play today that I think also fits very much into that. When I leave here, I'm heading directly into the Culture, where they're performing a play that started on the Edinburgh Fringe last year. It's called The Brothers Be But Believers. And it is an attempt to grapple with the radicalization of young men. Everything I've heard about it says that it actually engages the audience in trying to understand the roots of extremism, trying to engage in a way that helps you to empathize with young men being radicalized in a number of different ways, and very much through social media and online engagement. So I'm really excited to go see that for exactly that reason. It's about something that I don't truly understand, and I want to have that opportunity to actually understand where things like this are coming from and other people's perspectives on it. So something I would encourage others to go and see is catch that show, as well as others of a similar sort. Um, Obviously, when I talk about that kind of thing, it leads quite naturally to the discussion of the possibility of reading books to understand more context, to understand the history that other people might bring to their conflicts, or to what they're dealing with. And I see Walter asking, what was the show again? It's The Brothers Be But Believers, and it's playing currently at the Culture. But what you also get in these kinds of circumstances, I think, is that chance to read historical fiction, try and engage in what might it have been like, what are the stories that people bring into conflict historically. There are so many fantastic Indigenous story writers starting to be published in Canada. And that is one of the areas where I am starting to try to dig in and read more and more story. I would also say that the other types of stories that, not historical, but engaging with the historical experiences of people coming from different backgrounds, are very frequently found in the science fiction and fantasy realm. It is really impressive to me the numbers of fantastic books that are coming out in those kind of areas, that are imaginings, frequently by people of color, who are exploring the world through an entirely different lens, and bringing a really, really interesting and creative opportunity to engage and learn about different perspectives. If I were to recommend books, some of the first ones that come to mind for me are anything by Octavia Butler, but similarly anything by N.K. Jemisin, who's currently writing and doing an absolutely amazing job on engaging people. So those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about whether conflict can help you to actually become a better conflict resolver. It's about learning and understanding, but it's also about having the opportunity to go back to a text and engage differently and think about what options could take place, about ways things could play out differently and how you could actually change them. So I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna allow time for questions. I know there's not a lot of people on the line right now, but I will make a note that if you want to engage with me about this topic later, you can do it here. You can definitely come on and put questions into any of the comment boxes now. You can put them on later if you happen to engage with this later. But you can also just get in touch with me through this page. I would be more than delighted to chat with you about further things on this topic. And I'm always really, really excited to hear what people are seeing, what people are reading, what people are engaging with. But there's a couple of things that I would point to if you're interested going forward. Core Reads just posted video yesterday where Darcy Meredith, Julie Daum, and Erin Leakey spent some time working with Wendy LaCusta in coming up with a collaborative decision around which of three books they ought to read and that they recommend to other conflict resolvers to read. And I don't know if Walter's going to grab that and post it. That would be great, the link for that, but otherwise I will afterwards. But they go through discussion of happiness, blindness, and Persepolis. And I have no idea why they all chose titles that have that kind of resonance together when said together, but those are the three books that they chose. And so I would absolutely encourage you to go watch them. Their engagement is right on point for what I'm talking about, but is deeper because they're actually engaged in talking about very specific books. They are talking about why happiness actually leads you to understand conflict better and takes you to a better place, why Persepolis does, which of these might be the one that they would recommend the most. So I definitely encourage that you look at that and then also hopefully read the book that they chose, because we will be getting together in January and having a discussion of that book. Beyond that, I'm going to sign off now, but please do join me through either the comments here, through email, through any other contact that you want to make, and I will enjoy having the chance to chat with you further about conflict and fiction. Thanks.